What you know, alibiyers, I hope you guys are having a great day so far. It's Tuesday, February 24th, day 2 in the Kouri Richins trial. We are going to go over the first witnesses before a lunch break. And starting us off, Deputy Vincent Nguyen was back on the stand, and the defense attorney toned it down a lot today, I have to say. He shows the witness what times he arrived and left. And then he asks how long was he there with Detective Woody. He arrived at 3:40 a.m. and left at 5:49 a.m. And then later on, it's discussed that it said 5:41 a.m. as the time he left. And the defense says 8 minutes discrepancy here. Is that you walking to your car or doing some things? And he says yes. Detective Woody arrived at 5:17 a.m. and the defense says there was 24 minutes with you and Detective Woody there on scene together. Another deputy logged him out at the crime scene log there at the scene. What did you tell Officer, I guess Debitel, I couldn't understand. And the witness said he gave him a brief of what he had gathered. Kouri's statements, approximately at 9:30, she went to bed. And then around 3 a.m., she went to bed with Eric. And at that time, he was cold and heavy. As far as this conversation with Kouri, it was not a formal interview. It was just part of the death checklist. And he's asked, what did you learn? The witness said that Kouri placed a blanket on Eric and turned the light on and then realized he wasn't responsive. What did she do after she put the blanket on? The witness said she stayed there for a minute and didn't feel him breathing, meaning she stayed in the bed with him. During your entire conversation with Kouri that we saw yesterday, it was edited, but I want to talk about the entire conversation you had. She was emotional and upset, right? Which is not unexpected, and the witness says correct. Would it surprise you if another officer said you thought she was not emotional? Would you make that statement? And the witness says, I don't know her. He hands him a document and talks about what needed to be done in a death investigation. For example, family needs to vacate the scene and go to a comfortable location, either outside or at family or friends' houses. That wasn't done here, and the witness says no. He's asked when he photographs the scene. What's the first photo you should take? And the witness says the placard with the case information on it, but the witness did not do that. Another thing that's listed on the death checklist is do not disturb the scene. And the defense says the scene was not secure. The witness said it was semi-secured, so the defense has him read from the document and asked, is semi-secured on there? He says no. On a redirect, they talk about the chain of command at the sheriff's office. The witness was a patrol deputy, and above that would be his sergeant, and above that, the lieutenant, and then the captain. And then you have your investigators mixed in. None of that was your role that night. The witness says correct. His responsibility was to fill out the death checklist, and we saw him do that on camera. What did you do with that before you left the scene? The witness logged that into the case file. The defense says other officers can see that and review it. And the same thing with the report you filled out? Yes. Speaking of Kouri's emotional reaction, have you been to death scenes? And the witness says a lot. Was her reaction consistent with what you typically see? And he says no. Normally, the victim has tears. They look at him when he's asking questions. He said when he spoke to Kouri, it seemed like her face was in her hands and he just couldn't see her face. One time he leaned down and tried to see her emotions, and he just said it was a little abnormal. How many times have you encountered Kouri after losing a loved one? And he says never. You don't know her. You can't tell what she's feeling. You can't say it's abnormal. The witness said it's abnormal to other calls he's been on, and the defense says, but you don't know what she was feeling, and of course he said no. The next witness, Cameron Larson, who's an evidence technician, she responded to the scene around 6:30 a.m. and went to the master bedroom. She saw Eric on the floor covered with a white sheet. She removed that. Eric had a t-shirt over his face and he was wearing boxers. He had red fluid on his face as well as chest pads for the compression machine. And she said maybe tubing in his knees. The sheriff's office isn't supposed to touch the body until she arrives. She was told to look for any signs of alcohol. So she looked in the trash cans in the master bedroom, the kids' bathroom, and in the kitchen. She saw in the kitchen garbage can coffee grounds, a newspaper, and a ginger beer, which is not alcoholic. She did not note that in her report. Listeners in my chat say this is sometimes used in Moscow mules. Do you remember kicking any bottles in the room? No. The witness found Eric's identification in his wallet, and then she shows the tag that would have been put on the body bag, and she reads the number out. She would put Eric's identification in the body bag with him, as well as any medications with his name on it. She escorted Eric's body out with the transport team, and once the body was in that truck, that was the end of her role. On cross, this was your first crime scene you showed up to? And she was like, yeah. An OME investigator shows up to the crime scene and documents the body and anything they feel is important. They do photographing, gathering belongings, identifying the deceased, and gathering medication bottles. You worked alongside the Summit County Sheriff's Office. Is that kind of a you do your thing, I do mine thing kind of arrangement? And the witness said her role is only for the deceased. It would be the sheriff's office job to gather evidence. However, they did ask her to look in the trash cans. She said it didn't seem odd that they asked her to do that, but she said next time I would stick to my role. A year today, you had an interview with the Summit County Sheriff's Office and you were still an OME investigator. And she said yes, but with a different jurisdiction. Is it common to come back 3 years later and have a follow-up conversation? The witness said this was my first time. They had questions about what she had found in the garbage. You talked about how you only had one conversation with Kouri in her child's bedroom to tell her the process. She had her hands to her face and you gave her contact information? Correct. Back to March 4th, you were asked to look in the garbage cans. You didn't go downstairs and she said no. You found the ginger bottle in the trash can in the kitchen, which is by the sink. Do you remember seeing any Moscow Mule cups? No. The attorney's office asked about your report, and you said you didn't remember where you got some of the information from. Did you write this yourself, and where do you get that information? The witness said she gets that from the 911 call as well as any detective on scene. But you're not getting that information directly, so you don't know how truthful the information was, and she says correct. In the body bag were prescriptions. She doesn't remember seeing any medications. If she saw something, she would send it only if it had Eric's name on it. On redirect, do you have an inventory sheet to show what you included in the body bag? She says that she takes notes and she will enter in what was included in the body bag on the medical examiner's website. The next witness, David Pimentel with the Summit County Sheriff's Office. He did scene security and also started a medical log. That's a log of any medications the deceased would have had in their possession. They log everything about it, like how many pills are left in the bottle, when it was prescribed, and all that jazz. He looked in the bathroom, in a drawer, and then there is a little cabinet above the toilet. Kouri told him where the medications would be. He didn't see the THC gummies in the bathroom, and he also didn't see any paraphernalia or illicit drugs. On cross, did you arrive at 5:09 a.m.? Yes. He only looked in the bathroom. They show his report and point out that's not all your handwriting. So the witness points out what handwriting is his, and he does not know who finished that report. There are 3 medications listed that he found: naltrexone, hydrocodone, and doxycycline. Did Kouri tell you there were THC gummies that he may have taken? Yes. He didn't ask where they were, and the defense asked if it would be important to know. He said if they were prescribed, yes, but if he saw illicit drugs, he would have made a note. But you didn't think to ask where they were so you could log it? No. They point out the bathroom is connected to a walk-in closet, but he didn't look in there. He didn't write a report that night, but he did later in January of 2023, which was almost a year. He was asked by his supervisors to do that. It was very short, and he said he left the medication log on the dresser. Is it typical you wouldn't write a report at that time? He said, if my job is just the medical log, then no. He secured the room Eric was in by standing by the door to make sure nobody came in. He said Kouri and Eric's kids were trying to get in the room, and that is why he was put there. You're part of the K-9 unit, and you look for drugs on scene? Yes. The search you did that day was not a complete search, and the witness says, I was logging medication, but I was not searching for illegal narcotics, and he only logged what was made known to him. On redirect, he has a body cam and they play it. It shows him in the bathroom looking through those prescriptions. He was not asked to search the whole house and he had no reason to. You would need probable cause or a warrant to do that, but he found no THC gummies in the bathroom. On recross, did you look on top of that cabinet above the toilet? No. Are you aware that's where all the THC gummies were later found? No. Did you take photos before you started moving things? And he says no. The next witness, Margaret Offret, she is an advanced EMT and has been for almost 40 years. Once they arrived, they went into the bedroom and Eric was on the floor. They show where the body camera is paused and it's just a still. It stood out to her that Eric was at the foot of the bed instead of the side. When someone pulls another out of the bed, it's just easier to get them off the side of the bed. It also stood out to her that Eric's body was completely straight. Most times you would see arms out or they might be angled, but typically not just straight. Once she got in there, they hooked up the compression machine, they gave him epinephrine, and she asked Kouri if Eric was taking any meds. He was taking something for Lyme disease. Kouri did not give that to her, and also she says CBD gummies, which if that's the case, that's very different from THC gummies. She was there when the time of death was called, which was 3:58 a.m. She thought Eric had been dead for a while because he was cold to the touch and he was flatlined. On cross, one person was working on him doing compressions when she arrived. She doesn't know if that person positioned the body straight in doing so. The call was for a cardiac arrest, so she first hooked up their monitor to see if he had a heart rhythm and also hooked up the compression machine. He wasn't in cardiac arrest, right? And the witness was like, yeah, actually he was. They also gave Narcan, which is used to reverse possible overdoses. She told someone it could have possibly been an aneurysm, and then Kouri gave her Eric's medical history. He was on an off-brand dose of naltrexone, and you were told that was for Lyme disease, but the defense points out, however, it can be used to help with drug and alcohol cravings, and the witness says yes. There was an objection. The judge says move on. Eric's blood sugar was 458, which is extremely high. Also, they talk about a scale of alertness. It's called the GCS scale, and that goes from 3 to 5, 3 being the lowest and 5 being that someone is oriented, and obviously Eric was a 3. She was the one that informed Kouri that Eric was dead, and they talk about Kouri's reactions. On redirect, why did you say possible aneurysm? She said the blood coming out of his mouth was something that made her think that. Back on cross, it's not abnormal to see blood coming out of the mouth, and she said not usually that much. The defense asked about the pressure the compression machine uses, which is consistent pressure where individually we have different amounts of pressure we would put out depending on our size and things like that. The next witness, Sergeant Andy Cernich, he is with the Summit County Sheriff's Office, and he is also a volunteer firefighter. And he was on call as a volunteer firefighter that morning. When he gets to the scene, he does not mix his roles, so he stayed in the firefighter role and helped with CPR. They had asked him to take over Eric's airway, and he was also asked to look for medications as well. They show a photo of him with a bottle in his hand, and he also was looking in the nightstand drawers and found hydrocodone. On cross, they asked if putting a breathing tube in could cause bleeding in the throat. He said not usually, but it can happen. They show a photo of the nightstand, which had some pills on it. Then they show another photo of Eric's wallet that was on the nightstand, and the defense zooms in on these white specks on the nightstand. She asks what those are, and he's like, white specks? Did you have any conversations with Kouri that night? And he does not recall. The next witness, Maggie Mobley, she is a medical examiner assistant now, but at the time of Eric's death, she was a morgue clerk, which means she receives and releases the decedent. She answers calls and opens the door. They received Eric's body, and then they inventoried the belongings that came with him. She took a photo of the body bag seal and then breaks that and takes a photo of the body as well as the belongings with him. That is all put into inventory, and then the body is then put in a cooler. They show a photo of the seal on the body bag that it had not been altered. They go through the written form she logs on. She records clothing, medications inside the body bag, or any form of identification. They make a copy of the driver's license, which stays with the folder and the paperwork, and the medications are put in a locker as evidence, which the medical examiner has access to if needed. Once the autopsy is finished, they release the body to the funeral home, and anything that wasn't collected as evidence goes with the body as well. On cross, they ask about how the medications are received. She said when you get the body, the medications are either in a paper or plastic bag, but it's inside the body bag. She would not open that unless there was a driver's license inside the bag with the medication as well. Next up is Pamela Ulmer. She is the medical examiner, and she was the last witness before we took a lunch break. She is not finished with her testimony, so that will be included in the afternoon update. She explains the body exam and how they observe organs in the body first, and then they remove and weigh them. They do the same thing with the brain. Everything is sliced to look for any kind of natural disease on the inside. So, for example, you may see a clot in the heart for a heart attack, or you may see muscles that have evidence of degeneration. They also draw blood, urine, and gastric content samples for toxicology, and that is sent to a lab for analysis. For the external exam on Eric, there was the evidence of CPR. He had a tube in his mouth and needles in both shoulders for IV fluids. He had defibrillator pads on, EKG pads, and there was no evidence of injury. He did have blood on his face, and opiate ODs can cause pulmonary edema, which causes that foam from the lungs. And when you're having CPR, the pressure contributes to lung injury. So it is common to see bleeding and also injury to the mouth from that tube being inserted. For the internal exam, he had 2 broken ribs on the front left side, and those were from CPR. He was also in the beginning stages of coronary artery disease. She said this is not significant until it's about 75% occluded, and this is a very common finding in adults. There was no indications of any clot in his heart that would have caused a heart attack, and there was no damage to his heart muscles. For the respiratory system, in the trachea and the bronchi, that foam was present, and she said that is probably from the fentanyl. Could be from CPR, but he had no return of circulation while CPR was being performed, so the majority of that foam just likely came from the overdose. For his lungs, he did have some white nodules as well as on his lymph nodes around the lungs, but that did not contribute to his death. There were no active infections like TB or a fungal infection, as Kouri said, that she saw in the lungs. His stomach had partially digested food and liquid, which was retained for toxicology testing. She didn't think anaphylactic shock was an issue with his death, and there was no evidence he was septic. He did test positive for COVID, and it was reported he did have cold symptoms prior to his death, but there was no evidence of pneumonia, which is usually what causes death in COVID patients. So that was where we left off for lunch. I'll recap the rest of her testimony and the other witnesses for this afternoon later this evening. That is it for now. Have a good rest of your afternoon, and we will see you soon.